that you want to run with in 2019, which has to do with tolerance. From Gays and Lesbians Association of Zimbabwe, just in brief, if you can take us through, what is it all about, that campaign?
Well, I think the campaign is about highlighting how we as a society are as diverse as possible. And if you look at our constitution, for instance, in our preamble, it actually says united in our diversity. And what that means is that it acknowledges that we are as different as possible, whether in stature, whether in color, whether in race, whether in gender, whether even in the opinions that we bring to the table as individuals within a nation. And with that in mind, if you also look at the different parts of the constitutions themselves, they acknowledge that there are certain freedoms that are entitled to individuals. Those freedoms are to promote their diversity. If you have the freedom to your conscience, the freedom to associate, the freedom to assemble, it shows that different groupings would be coming together and with different interests, whether it's cultural differences that are bringing people together, or whether it's to do with religion itself. People of the same interests come together, but there are others who may not come to your table because they have other interests elsewhere. And how do we coexist as a society with that diversity and those differences? And from our end, we are also saying there are also people of a different sexual orientation and a gender identity that have always existed in time immemorial within our society. How do they coexist with us? Because where there is tolerance, peace exists. And if we are a peaceful nation, we need to be able to promote that diversity and tolerance. That's basically where we're coming from.
So how has been the reaction from the society if one openly says, I'm gay and I'm lesbian?
Well, like it depends where you're coming from. If from the family setting, with the work that I've done as a therapist for the last 20 or so years, I've had people that at a family level, they've been accepted by their families for many reasons. Some would say, I've always known my child was different. This could be a father or a mother, but I thought maybe the child would grow out of it in terms of that difference. The difference being seen in the way they express themselves, their interests when they are growing up, whether it's hobbies or how they interact with other children. They've always been different from what traditionally is known, maybe for instance, between genders. But there are also others who have also experienced disownment, social exclusion, premised on different positions, whether it's religious belief or a cultural belief. From a religious perspective, some would say, well, because the Bible says this, I cannot accept my child. And even today, when you look at how it's being framed, it's now different from when I grew up. People are now associated with Satanism, which I think growing up we never used to hear a lot about Satanism. We knew there was Satan, but Satanism is something that I think over the years has come up, I think because of the diversity in our religion and how people explain things. So if you are gay, you are associated with a cult, you're associated with Satanism, or that you are possessed by a devil and so forth. From a cultural perspective, others would say it's either you're possessed, you need to be cleansed, and so forth. But there are others that believe that because you're gay, they rush to conclude that you want same-sex marriage. So they also come from a position where they are saying, I don't want my child to be gay, because they want to get to gay marriage. So with that in mind, the reaction then is, you're no longer my child. This is not something that is experienced by just older persons who can take care of themselves. It's been experienced by young people as early as 12 years old, 14 years old, 16 years old, who have simply said, Mom, I think I'm different. There's something wrong with me. I like John, or I like Mary. When they're a boy, they like John. If they're a little girl, they like Mary. Or a boy child who simply like stuff that are associated with the female gender. They like playing dolls, they like plaiting their hair, maybe sometimes it's in their voice. Those are easy to tell. And it's been difficult for parents to accept that. I think part of it also has to do with the failure of society over the years to acknowledge that there's these children, and parents who go through that needs a support system. Culturally, we don't speak about sex. Worse off, when there's a confusion within a child, we've always found a way to explain it, but a child, you don't entertain their opinion of what they are feeling and how they may need to express themselves. We tended to beat it out of them. It's either a child is beaten to say conform. So in a world as diverse as it is now, and there's the globalization where we travel and get to learn a lot of the different cultures and practices, I think people are realizing that gay people or lesbian persons are found all over the world. But it's difficult in a country like ours, where for many years the former head of state, for instance, really made it a mission that these people should not be accepted by society. Then we also have individuals that have found comfort within other family members but rejected by others. They may be accepted by their extended family than the immediate family. And they've also others who have also created their own families because they've been rejected by their nuclear family or their extended family. They create what we call their own families. You know, in the gay community, we have what we call our own families, where my friends and their parents who have accepted their own children became almost another third part of a family, because they then step up and support you in terms of shelter, in terms of affirming the love and support that they get. So that's how diverse it has been. But when you look at the public domain, it's a different fora. I think because of the intolerance in our society these days, I don't think it's just intolerance of LGBTI persons. I think it's intolerance of everybody, whether they've got a different opinion or from a different club, from a different political position, of a different religion. We've become just intolerant of people. So LGBTI persons have also experienced intolerance.
Yes. Still on that, you mentioned something where you say the parents who say the Bible does not say this, I'm a Christian. How is your community still on tolerance has been received in churches, in the Christian community?
I think it's some traditional churches that I think have sort of made LGBTI persons welcome to the church, because we believe, even as a community, that the church is not for the holy, it's for the sinners, and for all of us who are striving to be good persons, to be better people, to coexist with each other in love and respect, which I think what the Bible emphasizes on love. And I think with that in mind, we've had churches where LGBTI persons have been welcome. They may condemn or condone the behavior, but I think in terms of making sure that people are inculcated in church, that has happened. But then there are also others who believe that, people have to be exorcised of that demon and spirit. And people have told stories to us of how they've been initiated into try and, confess and take away the homosexuality within them. And that has made it difficult because, first of all, you become a public spectacle because everyone then knows what your sexual orientation is or what your personal struggle is. And every day, even after going through those initiations, if you still find there's a battle between who you are as a person and your sexual orientation and the expectations of the church, people then start living almost what I call a double life. They'll come to church and not be honest about themselves because that space is simply said, we will want to take that demon out of you. And if a person feels I have not changed, I still who I am, because it's something that is unexplainable to the individual, they found it very difficult. We've had people that have committed suicide some who come through here. Just last year we had so many cases, I think almost over 20 cases of suicidal ideation. And a lot of them is coming from the fact that they feel their own church has not been accepting of them, because it's either they confessed to a pastor or to a church leader or father, and then they became part of the sermon, or it's been spread among other congregations and they feel uncomfortable. There are others that have actually become almost atheist in the process. They said, I don't go to church anymore because I don't find myself being part of that. My sin is, among all other sins, is elevated more than others, and I feel I'm actually an isolate within the church congregation. There are some also that within church used to hold positions, whether they were good singers, good preachers, and because different churches have different sects within the church itself that people have to grow in, depending with your age and how you grow within the church structures, they've actually been disowned and said you can no longer hold this position. But a lot of our community actually continue to hide in church. But some have simply decided, I'd rather stay out of church. And they say, I've become a spiritual person. I still believe in God, or I still believe in a supreme being, but I don't congregate with others.
Yes, and just out of interest, last time we talked about where you tried to engage the political leaders from the ruling and the opposition parties, where you'd want to engage and hear their policies. Mm-hmm. As an organization also, have you tried to engage the church, the umbrella bodies of the church, and probably try and explain or teach them about the LGBTI community?
Mm-hmm. Over the years, we've always created spaces in the Muslim churches, traditional churches, the Catholic, the Methodist, the Pentecostal, to come and have a conversation about LGBTI persons who exist among their own congregation. And of course, people have different opinions to that. Traditionally, we've also had situations where you're sitting with an African traditional leader who would say, these things we can still work on exercising them out of you. And for someone like me who has worked with a community as a therapist for many years, I've had horror stories where people have been taken by their parents, for instance, to go and be exorcised. They have cuts on their bodies where they're applying medication to try and take that spirit out, or they're asked to take a bucket and a stone with some medication and wash every morning until that is exorcised, and so forth. And we've also had, from a Christian perspective, where individuals, they've also expressed that we'll take them to the mountains and pray for 40 days in there to try and fast to try and take that out. But at the end of the day, we've also realized that with them in the presence, that there were individuals who also spoke about their realities of how they've experienced church with the religious leaders. Some have also become very accommodative and understanding, not only because they coming from a position of just leadership. There are some who have actually acknowledged that in my own home, I've realized I have a gay child, I have a lesbian child, and I was struggling with it. I always see it as something that is outside my family, because you feel that if someone is a religious leader, everything around him, even their plates, they are holy. Let me put it like that. But they realize that even within their own family, they might find that there's a child who's struggling with sex and sexuality issues. And I think it was also an important space for us to have conversation, to realize that, LGBTI persons should not be seen within the lens of sex. It's not about sex, which I think a lot of society use that lens to look at gay people. The moment I say I'm gay, the first thing they think about is I'm having sex, and with who, and with whom, where, that sort of thing. And yet we are simply saying there are children among you who are struggling. How do you give them support, even if you are bringing in spirituality without damaging them? Even if you look at worldwide, we also spoke with the religious leaders around conversion therapy. Conversion therapy, where over the years, scientifically, they've also said, we can convert you to become straight. And there have been stories even up to today where conversion therapy has now been banned in some states across the globe, because it has damaged certain people. And sometimes they've also found that the people who are actually also doing conversion therapy have ended up coming out 50 years later and say, I'm actually gay, bisexual, intersex, and so forth. It's also when we are denying ourselves who we are, it can conflict with how then you express that by actually damaging others. So I think that's a space that we've been with religious leaders. There are a couple of religious leaders who have also written books on Zimbabwe and homosexuality to try and understand how that plays out. And I think as religious leaders, they're also trying to create a space where there's tolerance and acceptance, regardless of how, society and the Bible itself expresses. It doesn't say when you're gay, be condemned to death and so forth. It simply say express love. And that love manifests in so many ways in supporting who you are as a person so that you feel whole in life.
And still on accepted intolerance, how has been the situation in the rural areas?
Well, I think rural areas are still very territories, I think, for many years that we always felt were not spaces that welcomed outsiders, especially raising awareness on issues around LGBTI issues, or what we call ngochani or estaban in our culture. But I think what we've noted in speaking to some of our traditional leaders is that they do acknowledge that in their own localities they've experienced, or they know people who are gay or ngochan in their society. These are things that have not manifested now because of how the global world is viewed now, where it's accepted and tolerated in other states. But it's something that have always been there. But it's the unspoken. As long as someone doesn't speak about it, they don't speak about gay marriage, they don't speak about I want to be in a relationship with men, people turn a blind eye whatever they are doing. If then they were caught, for instance, there have been incidents. If you go to our historical archives, where we store our African information, our Zimbabwean history at the archives, there are stories dating back to 18th century where in our society those stories were there, where people were caught in same-sex relations or compromising positions, and they've been brought to our chiefs and so forth. And of course it varies which section of Zimbabwe that had occurred, where they will tell you we had remedies to that. It's either unoripa, you act to the chief for defaming their village, or sometimes you were thrown out, or some people were known to say Ningi would come to the village and move away to the cities, and we've always known that they were like this, but no one really said much about it. And at times some of them ended up being in heterosexual settings. If they then have relationships with other men or sex with other men, it's something that is done behind closed doors. They would not know, but they will know Ningi at some point was caught with another man. And these are things that they said, come, let's talk about it so that we understand more. Because as I said earlier in my conversation, we as Zimbabweans, to start with, we don't talk about sex and sexuality with our children and what that even means. A lot of us experiment, for instance, even when it comes to shaving, I had to learn from others and not from my dad. And when I was having wet dreams, for instance, it's not something you go to your parent and discuss about. So culturally, they say some of these things were not talked about. But I think they are willing to learn more and hear more, especially with HIV raising its head over the years. That the fact that we're continuously having high rates of HIV in our society is something that they are also interested in having conversation to say, how do we help those that are different within our locality, and how do we support them to access services? But of course, there are still traditional processes that they feel they are still in place. How do we even have a conversation around that? Do we need to change there's still an issue around culture and religion, but we're also saying intolerance. We need to be able to expose ourselves to different cultures and practices and appreciate that they are not the same. It's interesting that even when we talk about this is an African, even people in America think Africa is a country.
Yeah.
Yet we don't realize that as much it's a continent which is as diverse. There are certain practices that may be done in West Africa and East Africa that to a Southern Africa may be seen as very unacceptable and uncultural. So it's something I think that the traditional leaders have expressed, that can we not do more conversations in the rural areas than in our boardrooms and our city hotels? I think that's something that we need to take as a challenge. But I think if you look at the political space that we were coming from, we could not access those spaces just for conversation. And I think for tolerance to thrive and for us to promote diversity and growth that we see as a country, we need to allow people to have the freedom of expression, the freedom of conscience, to be able to share their stories and respect that diversity.
Last time there was a talk where information said there was going to have some men-only clinic or drop-in centers. How far are we with that project?
Well, I think in terms of clinics, we as a society, as a community, and I think also being a man as I am, I think that clinics should be accessible by everybody, regardless of their gender. Why should we have special men clinics? I don't think it's about us creating special clinics for men. But I think with the evidence that's on the ground, it's still very difficult for a lot of men, regardless of their gender or sexual orientation, to access healthcare facilities. It's still around 43 to 46% of men go to health facilities for some reason or the other, but the majority don't go. So when we're talking about ending HIV, for instance, in 2030, or reaching our goals, the 1990 globally, you still find that the men that we need to actually get tested, for instance, or to go to health facilities, they are not going. To avert HIV or new infections, we need to reach the men. But does that mean creating different healthcare facilities? Possibly, but I don't think that's what the issue. How do we make the existing structures accessible? So I think with that in mind, we are also saying as a community, should those facilities not be accessible for LGBTI persons without stigma, without prejudice? Because with our constitution, if you look at the preambles, as I said, in all our diversity. So if we also started promoting diversity in the health sector, and acknowledging that gay people exist among us, regardless of the fact that we may not agree with who they are as a person, we can still give them enough respect and tolerance. And I think that also speaks to men also feel that they are welcome. It's not just a women's space when they're pregnant or when they have certain issues that they need to be addressed, but it's also for all genders to access. But I think what has happened now is we are trying to create safe spaces where, for instance, gay men have sex with men, and the LGBTI persons are able to come together and share what their needs are with regards to health, with regards to rights, with regards to other rights like shelter, employment, without being discriminated. So we have now existing drop-in centers where they can come in and have conversations, but not only them coming to the space. We are also bringing their families to the space, because there are parents who have felt, I failed to get support to understand my child. At church, I've been laughed at to say, how come your son is now 43, not married, or is not coming back from South Africa or this other country that they've gone and we've never heard who is married, or they've even gossiped to head. That's how people express. They think is like an exercise. And we bring parents and friends and relatives to this space to also talk about their struggles, their journeys in accepting and being tolerant of their child. Some just tolerate, but we are all driving towards acceptance. And we can't just bring LGBTI persons to those spaces only. We need to bring their families and friends. We also bring in policymakers and religious and traditional leaders to this space to discuss these issues. It is a social issue, as much as we want to be as ignorant as we can about it. But we need to create that space where we have the conversations and bring in different opinions. And I think that's why those drop-in centers exist. These currently, unfortunately, they are still in the major cities. That's where we've created them. But as you've questioned earlier, how do we deal with the rural community? I think it's also for us to continuously speak to our government to say, how do we become as inclusive as possible to make sure that whether it's a healthcare service, it's available across the country, including rural communities that I think continuously remain marginalized, because that's where our biggest population is.
And acceptance and tolerance since the former president left the office, or I can say in the new dispensation.
Well, I think in terms of tolerance, I think the levels have gone up. There's less harassment of people on the ground. People are able to express themselves more. People are able to live their lives to the fullest, in the sense of trying to create their businesses without being looked at with a gay lens. They've tried to run their small little businesses without feeling I need to be conscious that I'm gay and I'm not wanted in this country. We have seen people also even in the levels of trying to uplift themselves within the education system, being more relaxed and not always conscious that the gay conversation is so negative to a point where it affects their learning abilities. We have seen some also help within the health sector, people accessing more of the services around testing, initiation into art, access to pre-exposure prophylaxis, prevention information. We are also seeing people having more space to engage in conversations, not just about their sex and sexuality, but also because we have different interest groups in our community also as LGBTI persons that are coming together to talk about business. Because if you look at the new dispensation, it has its mantra that we are open for business. So people are also looking for opportunity to say, if the space is opening up, what sort of businesses can we run without having the sexuality lens hanging on our head and feel that we are not integrated and accepted. In terms of acceptance, I think it's still a long way, because I remember having a few live shows on radio and TV where I've had people realizing that as diverse as we are as Zimbabweans, we need to be as tolerant and accepting as possible, because gay people do exist among ourselves, among our society, in all our diversity. And it doesn't matter whether you're coming from an affluent suburb to a rural community, they are there. So how do we make sure we build Zimbabwe together? Because we all have a responsibility to create a peaceful nation, and that comes with tolerance. And I think that's something that we are seeing, that in terms of acceptance, there are individuals within families, within society, within social groups and political spaces that are becoming more accepting of LGBTI persons. And they are proud to call them my friend, my relative, and so forth. But if you look at the general society in itself, I think there's more tolerance than acceptance. Tolerance being that LGBTI people, if you look at just the last year, we had less reported violent cases in the traditional places that we used to get high volumes of violence towards LGBTI persons. But there are some spaces that we've not tapped into, which are like, for instance, smaller towns and rural communities, where we feel there's still underreporting of violence and any other violations that people experience. And I think that comes with us continuously raising awareness and having conversations. That's why the issue of tolerance for me is a conversation that I feel for the next 12 months we'll continuously talk about it, so that we create an inclusive and peaceful society that is as diverse as possible.
And as we conclude, how do gay men and lesbians find love? Because we have always heard about men having sex with other men, women having sex with other women, or in the same sex marriage. How do these people meet? Because we have heard people saying, if they come to me and propose, I'll beat them. You know, that kind of a thing. How does one, say, find love so that they end up in that relationship?
Yeah, it's quite interesting what you have asked, because a lot of people think if you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or non-conforming person, you're simply attracted to everybody. who is human. It doesn't work like that. Just like a man, if you identify yourself as a straight man, which a lot of people see themselves as straight, which means heterosexual, you're attracted to people because of different traits, right? It could be there are men who like their women light, there are women who like their women dark, who like them tall, who like them slim, who like them funny, in all their diversity. It's the same thing with women, heterosexual women. That some will tell you, I don't like a short man, I'm short. I don't think some women might find me attractive. But there are women who also like, I like my men short and it's fine by me. Some who would say, I want my men tall and light. You know, you have certain traits that you look for. Gay people do the same. And you find that they are also beyond just the physical. There are also things that people look at. Do they go to church? We also look at that. So issues of spirituality plays a role. Are they spiritual? Do they go to church? Are they an intellect? There are people also who look at that. I like someone who challenges me. Or people who would say, I like someone who's industrious, who's productive. So we look at the physical, psychological, the spiritual bit of it. And how do we find love? I think it's an interesting question, because you find that in all our conversations that we've had in the last 30 years, people always look at us through the sex lens. Yet they don't realize we also have and want stable relationships. And people have managed to create those stable relationships that are not premised on sex only. And sometimes people just don't find their sexual partner, but they can find someone they can relate to at a relationship level, spiritual level, and so forth. It's not always about sex. And finding love, it's something that happens. You don't plan for it, it just happens. And I think also one of the things that I just want to be clear about is that it's not always that people have to look and say, I want that one, and then there's a magic portion that crosses to your path, and then you find yourself attracted to that guy or that girl. I think from what you've said, you've heard people saying, if they come to me, I would say no. It doesn't work like that. You don't just come to somebody and say, I want to date you, because I think it comes to some of the prejudice that I said earlier, that if you are possessed, then it's that bad spirit that then hooks the next person to say, let's be in a relationship. It's magical in the way it happens. Yeah. Just like straight people happens. You could meet someone on the street and simply catch their eye, they catch yours or caught yours, and you look at each other and they're like, hey, hi, how are you? Do I know you? Just like straight people do. If you're hanging out, you get along. Next minute, you're like, yeah, I want to continue hanging out with you. Let's see how that goes, and it happens. But I think the difficulty is on the street, it's not as easy as straight people do, because if I walk out on the street today, especially for busy people, even the straight people who use, for instance, dating apps, because of technology, there are dating apps where people also express their interest and they give what they are looking for, who they are as a person. And then people reach out and say, look, I've seen your profile, I'm a busy person, but I want to see how they go on dates as well. It's not always rushing behind closed doors and have sex. They are there in the public, they go on dates, get to know each other, share a drink, share lunch, talk about what their interests are and see if they have anything in common. It happens like that. Then you also find that in different social spaces that we all hang out in life as individuals within society, you also get to talk to other people, and in expressing who you are and your sexuality with someone that you maybe feel comfortable, someone might say, look, I didn't know, but I'm also interested in you, or maybe let's see how that goes. And you develop, a lot of it, I think, for gay people started more as friendships that people create. And in friendships, they realize they actually are then in love. It takes time and it takes tactic, because the environment does not allow. If it was in South Africa, for instance, where gay rights or gay people are protected within the constitution and they deserve the same rights as everybody else, you find that it's easier to go to spaces that they could be covering, or they are providing services specifically for for gay people. It could be a club, it could be a church space, it could be a business space and so forth. And they're able to interact and network with people. And if you, through that networking, if you find someone you're interested in, you exchange numbers. You said, look, let's catch up, you go on dates. That's basically how people find love. But in this country, it's not that easy. Most people that I know of are actually not in relationship. I can almost say 90% of gay people that I've interacted with over the years, a lot of them will tell you I'm not in a relationship because the environment is not allowed it. But what they struggle then with is loneliness, depression, suicidal ideation. And we try and create spaces to just have conversation. When we meet others of their own, they feel better, they feel safe. It's about just acknowledging that this is who I am and I can live with it. We need to reconcile their sexuality or their identity with who they are in the current setting and be able to live with that. But a lot of people actually struggle to find relationship. They are lonely. Worse off as they get older and don't go into special spaces as young people. A lot of them suffer from depression and loneliness. And this is where we try and create support systems. I'm talking about people who are now in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. They become so lonely and worse off if they've come out to their family and have been disowned over the years. They tend to rely then on friends and sometimes who are busy, because look at our economy, you have to be hustling. They also then don't get the opportunity to create those stable relationships, but there are some who are.
And as we conclude, there are people that are watching right now, and we've been talking on the issue of the subject of acceptance and tolerance. What is your message to them?
Well, as the French philosopher and writer Voltaire always say, he says, I disapprove of what you say, but I'll defend you to death on the right to say what you are saying. For me, that's the message I leave to everybody. You may not like what LGBTI presents to you in society, but if we are to create the love and tolerance and acceptance that every individual deserves, you may disapprove it, but sometimes you need to defend your fellow man. Because if you fail to do that, if you cannot tolerate me as an individual because I'm of a different opinion, political position, religion, I come from a different culture, I have a different sexual orientation or gender identity, you'll find that it's difficult for you to tolerate the next person next to you. You cannot say today, I can tolerate this, but I can't tolerate that, because that's not how tolerance happens. You start with disliking or hating one person. It escalates, and I think that's what we see in our society today. As peaceful nation as we are, you find that there's now a level of high intolerance of people who are as diverse as we are, which our preamble actually acknowledge in the Constitution.